Welcome back to yet another episode of your Re-Educated podcast. Today we have an extremely special guest, Dr. Ana María García Blanco. She is a Puerto Rican educator who pioneered Montessori public education on the island. She is currently executive director of Instituto Nueva Escuela, a nonprofit organization devoted to the social and educational transformation of the public education system through the Montessori method. As an educator with her bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degree from Harvard University, she has always believed education is the key for social change and progress. She founded the first public Montessori school in Puerto Rico, where she was the principal for 23 years, increasing student achievement, reducing school desertion, eradicating school violence, and engaging families in the social academic project of the school. How are you doing today?
I'm well. I'm very well. Thank you for having me. I
Of
am
course.
very excited about this project you have and to have a conversation with you and the people that are listening to us today.
Yeah. I mean, we were even just how we started the conversation before we were chatting for a while. And I feel like you have been in education for so long that it has given you the time to think about these issues for so many years. And I feel like because of that, I'm really excited to tap into some of your wisdom and your insight. So I guess the first question you always have to ask is, how did you find your interest in education?
That's a great question. It goes really back to my childhood. My mother was a teacher and she taught me how to read before I went to school. So for me, that was very important. When I was 4 years old, before going into a preschool and being able to read and write at very early age, I was fascinated with learning since I was a child. So I have the example of my mother being a teacher, very close to my heart. And then I started working as a volunteer in a public school close to our home where my mother used to teach. And I started looking at some issues that are still with me today in terms of the different education that some children were getting in the city versus the children in my school were getting. So I was very interested in trying to stop that gap and to collaborate with the public education system since very young. And I'm talking about maybe high school. So I think I found my vocation while doing those volunteer works during high school. And I really wanted to be in a school and I wanted to be a teacher. Little that I knew that was going to raise very important issues that was going to take me to the university and to doing more work, more formal work in education. As I said before, Godam, I saw the injustices of two different systems, and one that was leading students to leave school before they went to high school, and the others that would take us to the best universities in the country and in the world. So I was very engaged with the community in trying to rescue that public school that was deteriorating. So I think my vocation and the scenery of an unjust system that was segregating our society from schooling, that was my interest grew, and I found my vocation. I found what I wanted to do the rest of my life. Early on, I am very lucky and very privileged to have a good school, a good education in my life, in my home. My mother and father were both very interested in our education and our development. And having that experience going out into the world and going out to schools and saying, okay, we have a job to do here. And this is what I want to do for the rest of my life.
Hmm. And so you were able to study in Harvard for about almost 10 years, right? For your undergrad, your master's, and your PhD. So how stark of a difference was that? What were some of the things that you had learned or noticed from your earlier, experiences of education to what it was like there?
Well, what I learned very early on is that I grew up in a growing urban city, where the pockets of poverty were trying. The city tried to take out pockets of people that were mostly migrants from the countryside, very rich culturally. There were also pockets that were born in the 19th century when the liberation of slavery. And the libertos stayed in the land in the city where there used to be these big landlords and big farms. They stayed and created their community. So we had a really rich community in terms of culture and history in the cities, but the cities became interested in another kind of society. So there was a movement, a gentrification movement of taking out the small communities and building these really very high, very expensive urbanizations. So I am growing up in the midst of that struggle of the community struggling to stay. And a very important piece in the gentrification process was the deterioration of the school. And it happened in my county, in Guaynabo, but also it happened around especially the coast of Puerto Rico, especially at that point in the north part of Puerto Rico, where there was this economic development, but it was an economic development not for all the people, but for some people. So schooling was a very important piece of if the school deteriorated, the system then declared that that school was failing, that they didn't have enough students, and they closed down the schools. So at the end of 20th century, we started seeing the closing of small schools, especially of inner city barrios in the city. So that's in my head, that's in my soul, that's in my friends. We were working together in the community when I graduated from high school, and then I went to Harvard. It's interesting your question, and people ask me, why did you stay at Harvard so long? I did my bachelor's degree at Harvard, and then I stayed for my master's degree, and I'll tell you that story. Then I came back to Puerto Rico, became a teacher at the school system. And 5, 6 years after being a teacher, I understood that I had to study more, that I had to prepare myself for a larger, scenario where we had to bring change to our public education system. And I needed to prepare myself for that. When I went to the college, Cambridge had a school, a public school very close to the campus. And I have to tell you, Gotham, from day one, whenever when they asked, I became part of the volunteer work unit of Harvard. I started walking the city, and I found this school. The Longfellow School is a public school in the city of Cambridge. And I came in to see what it looked like. And I think more than 70% of the children, because we're from Puerto Rico, we're from the
Oh,
inner
wow.
part, from Jayuya, from the central part of Puerto Rico. So I met this wonderful woman who was my teacher. She taught me so much. And I told her, I have to survive Harvard. And I'm not used to this academic, at that point, it was like, in my class, there were like 1,000 men, and we were like 300 women. It was a second class to be co-ed.
Oh,
So
really?
it was a very strange scenario for me. And also having people study from day to night and go to classes. My life was more out there in the community. So I needed some peace of mind. So I told the teacher, I need to work here. So I started working every day. I went to the school from 7 o'clock in the morning to 9:30 when the classes began at Harvard. So for me, it was a very important dance between the city, the children, the school. It was the first grade, and the university. So the university made a lot of sense to me because of what I was doing early in the morning. So for me, it was a win-win, and it was a way to complete the experience of a full-time student at Harvard College. When I was graduating the college, a professor, a Puerto Rican professor, came to the School of Education. He had been the Secretary of Education in Puerto Rico, a very, very special person. Now he's recognized as the best Secretary of Education we had in the whole century, and I think this century also. And he was a teacher, and he did some reforms at the school department level that were very important up to today. So I heard he was coming, so I applied to the School of Education of Harvard so I could take classes with Don Angel.
Mhm.
And that's how I started my relationship with this professor who was my mentor and my guide through the graduate studies. So I stayed 1 year and I did my master's degree at Harvard School of Education, and then I came back to Puerto Rico to work as a teacher for 5, 7 years in the system. And while I was working as a teacher in the system, I was working with the community of Juan Domingo, where I come from, the community organizing to deal with this deteriorating public school that was failing, and finally was closed down by the government because they said there was no children and it was a failing school. So I learned so many things during those years that have been important for the rest of the story. First of all,
Mm.
you don't close a deteriorating school, you make it be a good school. Uh, we worked for like 3 years, got them in the organization of the community to resist that closure of the school. The community knew that if the school was closed, their children were going to be lost in the streets, and the barrio was going to die eventually. The people were going to leave because they need to give their children schooling. So the barrio was very active, and we were able to reopen the school 3 years later in 1990. And that's when I was returning from my doctorate degree, and I remember, Gotham, a year before I graduated, they called me and said, we're going to take the school. We're going to open the school. We want you to be the school principal. I never planned to be a school principal. So I finished my degree and I finished my certification as a school principal in Cambridge. And then when I came back, we reopened the school and we started the first school to 3 years later choose Montessori as their curriculum. And that's where this story begins.
Wow. I mean, I feel like even in that first part before the whole Montessori segment of your story even begins, there's so many things to get into. So I want to first, you use this word deteriorating. I'm curious to one, understand if you could describe what makes a school quote unquote deteriorate, and what did you find was, you talk about instead of letting a school deteriorate or closing a deteriorating school, make it a good one. What is that first, what is a deteriorating school and what is that process like to change it?
Yeah. The deterioration of the school starts first with the gates closed. So they were they left the community out, they left the parents out, a very hierarchical structure in the district, and the allocation of budget. Our school, the physical, the structure was deteriorated. Was they started taking out budget in terms of staff. So there was very small, group of teachers. Some of the teachers you had teachers that had to be in three different schools, so you don't have a community of teachers there. So the school,
Mm.
the message to the barrio was, your kids are not that important. We don't need to have a beautiful, clean, well-attended school. So at some point, the community had struggled to rebuild two classrooms that they had to destroy because they have asbesto. It was a big thing in Puerto Rico, and finally the community, the government, destroy those two buildings, but they never rebuilt them. And then they never rebuilt the curriculum that was attached to those buildings. So the kids that were graduating from there were not graduating with the credits they needed to go on to high school. So it was a design to failure, you know.
Mm,
It became a very conflictive area when the schools deteriorates, Gotham, the other things flourish, you know. So the gang issue, the drug issue, the violence issue flourished. You let them the space. So nobody wanted to work there. You know, they were afraid. It was not safe. So, you know, I think that the system abandoned the schools like ours and like other inner city barrio schools. And I think there was a design in behind that I didn't understand then. Now I can see it as a national issue, where you do that and the people leave the barrio, leave the community, then you have open door to sell the land to to
mm,
change the population, to raise the prices and to so that's what I call a deteriorating school, a school that doesn't serve the children well and that doesn't respect the right to a good education that all citizens have, no matter what their social economic situation is.
mm,
So the opposite is a good school, right? And I'll tell you a story that can address your question. When we reopened the school, we did 3 years of community organizing, intense community organizing, so that the community resisted that closure and had a proposal in their hands. The proposal was to have a community-based school where parents would be engaged, where we had a, horizontal governance so that we can together build a curriculum that will serve our children. That was the concept of our school. 3 years after the closure, we were able to reopen the school. So we opened the school in 1990. The school was destroyed by the last hurricane that came through in the 80s. The Huracán Hugo had just gone through Puerto Rico. So we were dealing with not only a deteriorated school, a destroyed school. People had taken out the windows. It was an empty school. Uh, and at the gate of the school, we were opening the school. The school was destroyed, but we were so happy that we had the key. So that we inside the school with this enthusiasm of this victory, this community victory. And one of the parents, a really big guy, Leo, now he's a grandparent in the school, had 3 children then in the school, talked to me and said to me, you know, you're going to be the school principal. Now you construct a good school for our children. You have to do the opposite of what the old school did. So the community started calling it the new school, which for me was a synonym of a good school. And Leo was very clear. You have to give my children the best education in the world so that they find their vocation and they go on in life and be well-prepared people and good people. That was Leo's mandate. And I still have it so clear in my heart and in my mind. It was a great challenge, you know. It was the right challenge. So we went into the school and then we started constructing different structures of governance and of dialogue of educators putting heads together to serve the children well. So I forgot your question.
No, no. So you had brought up a lot about the idea of what a deteriorating school looks like. Because I think from community to community, country to country, what a deteriorating school looks very different. So I really appreciate you kind of drawing out what because I think it's easier to now like relate to what it is that you're talking about. But
And
the thing that
I have images from that time that are so powerful. I had a child tell me, Anna, when he was talking about deteriorating school, he said to me, Anna, I feel like they put me into a can, into a trash can, and put me la tapa, the top part, and I can't go out. That's how he described his old school. For me,
Wow.
that's a deteriorating school. When you have children seeing themselves that way, that's a deteriorating school. When parents told me, Anna, I cannot go into the gate, I'm not well seen inside the school. That's a deteriorating school. I think that
Mm,
this dehumanization of the school, a school that allowed Gotham that 40% of our children never were able to reach intermediate school. For me, that's an abandonment. The government decided, gave up on them, and that's how the barrio felt when they closed the school. It's like they gave up on us, and it was very connected to violence and to killings in the barrio. So this was not something superficial for the community. We lost people during those years of closure of the school, in the hands of the street, in the violence of the street. So it's a very important image for us.
yeah. And so when we connect that to, you talk about good school, and I'm excited to eventually get into Montessori. But before we get into Montessori, more of like a generic kind of a broader sense of the discussion of what makes a good school. One thing I wanted to highlight is I think there's something beautiful about the intention in which a school is built, or what is the intention behind the teachers and the students and everyone who enters a room. Because I've been to schools in India, for example, where the structures and the facilities weren't phenomenal, but I feel like everyone's intention who was stepping into that building was we are going to the best of our ability, create the best education that we can. I think something that you mentioned, which was really important, is that in this particular situation, there were people who benefited from these schools failing. And I think sometimes that when there is benefit from people suffering, then people oftentimes it's so unfortunate that people cash in on that. And so even when you're talking about this good school, how did you, I think that's the hardest part. How did you remove those players from still trying to, get their hands in and make the school fail again?
Yeah, various things. I think that the stronger the community becomes, the stronger the school community becomes, the harder it was for the people that wanted us out. Um, when we opened the school, I remember my first meeting with the superintendent. She called me doctor, but in a very disrespectful way. She called me like a little doctor, Doctorcita. She would to call me and says, Doctorcita, don't worry about this school. This school is not going to last more than a year. But then we are 35 years now old. The school is 35
Mm,
years. And we have, a huge family of children and young people. And, the alumni are incredible citizens doing things, marvelous things. Um, I think that you mentioned intention. I think that one of the things that the school system does, or is doing now, we're in a very critical moment of the system, is that divides people and also distracts people. A teacher today has to do so many administrative things, so many platforms. The teachers in Puerto Rico, I don't know how is it in many parts of the state now, but they receive every day plans of action, what they have to be doing, and if they don't do it, they're going to be penalized. So it's a very, very up-down system, and I am so overworked and so overwhelmed and so separated from my vocation and my role of educator that
mm,
people lose. We are the social tissue is so hurt that then there's not a collective intention. I think that the opposite was a very important element in our story. I think the fact that we were struggling, that the district abandoned us, that the district never thought of us, gave us a space of autonomy where we could create a network of teachers, parents, students thinking together, walking towards the same horizon. And that a sense of purpose I think gave us such a strong sense of community that when they tried to close down the school a few times while I was a school principal, they fired me twice when I was a school principal in the school, but they could not get away with it because the
Mm,
whole community was clear that we had to protect what was beginning to be what became a good experience, schooling experience for the children of Juan Domingo. So I think having reconstructed that social tissue and having a sense of purpose, very clear sense of purpose, everybody going towards the same thing, I think was important to deal with the adversity and to deal with the invasions that we had from the system at that point, including, the firing of a staff school, including myself, you know. But
mm,
they could not do it because they then found a very organized community, school community. So we
mm,
were able to take out things that divide other school communities, like politics, party politics, or alliances with religious groups, or our sense was that everybody was united because of one purpose. It was because of the well-being of the children and the young people of the barrio, and then nobody. I could be from one party, you could be from another, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that we are working together and it became a way of life
mm.
to us.
There's power in numbers. Yeah, I mean, that's like what's really clear in what you're saying, in that when you have other people to stand by you, so much can be done.
The other piece that is very powerful is the results. When they came to attack us, I said, okay, no dropouts, no drugs, no violence. Our children are doing well. Why are you taking me away from here? This is what we're doing. This is our letter of presentation. So that really helped. And very early on, for the surprise of many people, we started seeing a game changer. The school changed very quickly. Some elements that had been hurting the barrio, like the dropout rates and the failing rates of students, didn't fail. We gave the children
Mm,
what they needed, and they flourished. They were as smart as any other kid in the world. They didn't
mm.
have the right pedagogy, and that's how we came to Montessori. We Montessori was in the private sector, only in the private sector in Puerto Rico since the 1960s. And as part of our observation, reflection, constant dialogue between teachers and parents, we found a Montessori school close to the barrio, and we started observing that school. And we studied Montessori for a few years before we presented to the school council as an
Mm.
alternative pedagogy for our children. So that's how, so the community model uh, precedes Montessori. Montessori is the result of a community engagement, of a different governance. I was not the dictator of the school as a principal, I was part of the collective. And it's like you said, that sense of intention, of purpose,
Mm.
drove us to look for a good model that could not fail our children. We could not fail them.
And so my last question before we get into Montessori is I really want to touch on this concept of community because I think it's really important, and I've heard many people voice that that's what they feel like is lacking in their communities or in their schools. What were some of the actionable things that you guys did to build that community? Because that takes a long time, especially if what you were working with were people who felt very like separated from the schools. So to change that, I think it's a long process to make everyone feel like they're a part of something. That doesn't happen overnight. So what
No.
was that process like, and how do you start it, and how do you keep it going so people don't ever lose faith?
Yeah, it's your question is great. It was interesting. We had 3 years of struggle, door by door, the young people. after we opened the school, I called for a first assembly of parents because I think five parents showed up. And I was in shock. I said, "What happened here? Where are all my friends? Where are all the people that marched with me 3 years ago?" Two things happened. One, that was the first thing that happened, and then I met with the five people that came and said something is not right. And I had the first big lesson. They said to me, "The institution is too strong. The culture that the old school established is so strong that people don't dare to cross the fence that they rebuilt." So it was like, wow, this is a really important. So what we did, it was the next time, the next week, we called an assembly in one of the streets of the barrio. Everybody came. And then we talked about it. I said, "You know what? The school is our new home. We have to meet there. That's where our children are." And then we started going to the school. That was listening to the community and having concrete actions, so that we could move from a very hurtful situation to healing a relationship between a community and a school. It took some time. The other thing is to change the structure. Instead of us calling parents to clean, to bring cakes, or to tell them how bad their children are doing, we changed the pyramid around, and we made them part, or they were part of the council, school council, the governance, the committees. In each classroom had a committee of community people. They were part of the construction of the calendar of the year. So they were part, essential part of the education of their children. Respected. I didn't We call parents to be part and to make decisions together with us, not to tell them what was best for them and their children. And that was a game changer. I think that we had to reconstruct a relationship, to have a strong relationship with each family that came to the school. We had a concept emerged from that we say we enroll families, we don't enroll children. In the barrio, they said that I had many marriages, that I married everybody who came to the door. So, but that was the feeling. That was the method, that you're part of a family. And be true to that, not just say that, but that it's true. So the school really became a very happy, very alive place. And then many things happen. For example, some of the parents would come and say, "Ana, I appreciate the workshops, but I am having a lot of trouble at home with my partner." So we started some circles of support groups between parents, so families could help each other with different situations. So the school grew, the programs grew as the school listened to what the parents were needing for their children. Some of the parents came to me and says, "Ana, I don't know how to read and write." And so we started a literacy program for them at night. The school was open, Gotham, from 6 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock at night. The key of the school was in the hands of the young people that were playing basketball at night. So the relationship changed, and I think that's
Mm,
what made this work, and up to
yeah.
today. That's when we get to the big story, I could tell you that story of a deteriorating school, the community empowering, the community opening the school and turning into a good public school for their children is a story that repeats itself. I was in a school last week, Cabo Rojo, reopening a school that was closed down by the government. 130 children are coming in now in August from that community. Many of them had not gone to school in 3 years. So the story repeats itself.
Mm. And it's beautiful to hear these like long-term things, right? I think sometimes, and it's something I'm learning too now, where it's like nothing beautiful really happens in the span of a year. Or, you know, to have these like short term, we're going to turn this entire
Mhm.
community around 6 months and it's going to be, it takes so much time. Because, like what you said, right? The first meeting, five parents came up, and then you had to meet people where they are and then slowly shift the perception. And you have to build trust with the students and people. And that trust takes a long time to build, and
Yeah.
belief and hope. And so all of these things, I think, is beautiful when looked at over the span of decades rather than in the span of like expecting really quick, short results.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the thing I'm excited to now get into is, so from this community model, you ended up learning about Montessori. One, why did you pick Montessori, or how did that specific philosophy rather than another pedagogical philosophy come, like why did you choose that one? And then we spoke a little bit a few episodes ago with Larissa a little bit about the Montessori philosophy, but I would love to hear a little bit again for listeners who may not have listened to that episode. So yeah, so we can start about maybe your the pathway, how you found Montessori.
Yeah. Mira, it's now that I look back, because I see so many symbols, so many important signs in the story. Our school was started at kindergarten to sixth grade. Um, and I had my first child was born the first graduation of the school. And I believe that children should go to school very early on, at 2 or 3 years old. I mean, my mother just taught us how to read when I was three. So we were, and I was looking for a place for my child, and so were other parents from the school. And we found at the other side of the avenue this private Montessori school. So we went to study the school. We loved the school. I loved what I saw. I saw happy children learning happily and learning fast, learning many, many things. They were reading, writing, they were engaged. I really fell in love with what I saw when I saw the Montessori model. It was 3 years to 6 years, right? A house of children. So some of us put our children in that Montessori schools because we couldn't put them in our school. We didn't have those grades in the school. So we really studied the model from our own experience. And we were like five families from the barrio. We negotiated with the school, asked for some scholarships. We established a really good relationship with the private school at that point. And then we came back to the community and we said, we found a model that we think we should all see. So then people of the community came, observed. We were studying Montessori like for a year before we presented it to the council, to the school council. And the school council approved that we changed our from traditional program to a Montessori program. It was the first time in Puerto Rico that a public school will consider a Montessori curriculum. Um, I should say to you that at that point in 1993, a very important law was approved in Puerto Rico that gave autonomy to schools, created school councils, and the school councils were able, under the law, to decide which model they wanted for their children. That lasted not so long, because then the politics and the merchants got inside of the school department, and they don't like school autonomy. They don't like community participation. So, but it was a good, the door opened and we came in, and the community was able to decide on Montessori. So that's how we did it. We were looking for a model that would have our children, give our children a strong academic project, at the same time, a very human, caring program. Montessori is very respectful of the child and of the youth. And the third piece, the Montessori program emerges from the science of child development and youth development. So I'm not going against the nature of the child. I am serving the child with the curriculum, with the methodology that she or he needs. And the miracle happens. The children learn. I don't have to teach them. They learn. So for us, was a win-win. It was an excellent academic piece, a curriculum. It served us so well that in less than a year, we started seeing a lot of changes in the school, good changes in the school. The kids, the small children from House of Children, as they became part of the elementary school, the teacher said, "Hey, we need to change. These kids are different. We have to change." So that was a great exercise for a faculty before the children, saying, we have to learn how to do this in a different way. So the school starts changing and growing into Montessori slowly until when we reached the first 10 years of the school, we were already the first public Montessori school in Puerto Rico.
Wow. So what would you consider to be the philosophy that the other schools take on? So if we call this school a Montessori school, what is the kind of what is the difference and what would we call the other kind of is there a philosophy that
The the
informs the other
differ
schools?
the difference between the Montessori and non-Montessori schools. What is the difference between them? I would say first, um, the Montessori school constructs its curriculum and methodology on the science of development.
Mm-hmm.
The traditional school constructs the curriculum on standards of education decided by the state that doesn't consider the science of human development. They construct the standards and then they evaluate through a lot of standardized testing the children. Our schools are enraizadas in the nature of children and how they learn. So
Quick
it's the
question,
way.
if you don't mind me asking, I just wanted to add on that. I just had a question that before you carried forward. Then what would the standards be built on then? If because are they also not built on something like, okay, at this age, because of their age, they should be able to understand X, Y, and Z. And then at that age, is that not also built on development?
I think that there's a gap between the standards and the methodology that respond to those standards. For example, let me give you a very concrete example. Children in the traditional schools in kindergarten are supposed to be learning letters in order of the alphabet. So the teacher teaches all the children a letter today or a sound tomorrow, a sound the next day. And some of the children learn how to read, some of them don't learn how to read. So usually in first grade, they need to do some remediative work so that they learn. And the standard is reading in both systems. The methodology that is used is different. For example, in kinder, the standards establishes that the children will learn from A to H, from 1 to 10. In Montessori, what the children learns is to discover the decimal system. The children learns to discover reading through writing. So you don't have the limits nor the imposition. The child can learn different sounds in different moments, and Pedro could be working on three consonants while Maria is working on two vocales. So the system in the traditional system presents a standard that you have to break up in different lessons from A to Z through the year. And the child that doesn't do that fails. In Montessori, it's different. In Montessori, you have 3-year curriculum, and the child works first preparing their senses, like the hand, their vision, smell, etc. And then they're presented with the universe of language, and the child discovers the language. So the standards in Montessori, at the end of those 3 years, that the child reads and writes, writes short stories, paragraphs. So it's there's a difference. This one is more um, broken down into little skills, and they are organized in a way that doesn't really go with the nature of development and learning. So
Mm.
the teacher's planning, she plans for 25 children that are the same age and they have to have the same. In Montessori, you have 3 ages, a multi-age classroom where children learn from each other, children learn by acting, by interacting with the materials, versus the traditional school that you are in a table. You have a notebook, and you have to follow every hour. You have a class. In Montessori, you have the universe, and the child discovers the universe in different spaces. So when you look at the standards, they're different in terms of the requirements of each grade. Montessori talks about 3 years. The standards of the state talk about 1 year, second year, third year. Um,
Oh,
Montessori,
interesting.
the standards are come out of an integrated curriculum. In the traditional school, the standards are more compartmentalized by subject matters, even at very early age in development. And I think that when you go to the methodology, here in Montessori, the child learns through exploration, through repetition, through interest. In the traditional way, the teacher decides what we're going to teach today, what we're going to do tomorrow. So it's a different approach to learning.
Yeah, you use this word discover, which I think is like a often when you think about, I appreciate you also using the to define the traditional schooling as like a standards-based schooling. I think one thing that's really interesting to me, and I'm curious to hear what you think, is I have some students that I teach that have a really hard time with autonomy because their whole lives they've always been told what to do, what to study. And so when I ask them simple questions like, what is it that you want to learn or what is it that you care about, they have a really hard time like figuring that out for themselves. Their answers are often just, I want to do well in school. And that's it, right? I'm curious, but you're talking about children starting at the age of 3, 4, and 5. Do you find that some students at that age prefer, something that's a little bit more standardized, or do you feel like at that age every student loves autonomy to the highest degree?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a concept in the Montessori philosophy that is called human tendencies. Probably Larissa spoke to you about this. And I think when Maria Montessori observed children, when you and I observe children, tendency, la tendencia, is for independence. The human being walks towards independence. That's the natural path. So you're going to see that from day one. From how the child and the infant, the toddler, is making is conquering their body first, and their actions, their movements, then their words, then their capacity to solve problems. It's a process of independence. So when you ask me what they prefer, I say if you prepare the environment in the right way, in a good way, in a human way, the child is going to develop that natural instinct of independence. Uh,
Mm.
it's interesting, this cultural thing. They say that terrible twos. When you are a father, they tell you, "Oh, you have a child 2 years old. That's terrible twos." And it's
Mm.
not. I think what they're seeing is not a terrible two. Is I want to do it by myself, mom. Attitude. I want to conquer. The human being walks towards that. So I would say at all stages, I think that the human being develops in a more natural, in a more deep way, if they're able to develop the independence. So the Montessori classroom is designed for that, the development of a child that is in order, because order and structure and discipline is important for independence and for security. So the classroom is designed so that the child can move, because children learn moving. When I go into these preschools and these kindergartens, that they have children sitting down all day in these little, this is my seat,
Terrible.
my name. The child needs to move. The brain needs a child to move to be able to develop. That's science. That's not an opinion. And so I would say it's marvelous to see how the infants and toddlers, how they start conquering their classroom, and then they come into the house of children and they discover the universe in a very free, structured way. The methodology in Montessori, the teacher gives the gift to the child, presents a concept, presents a material, and then the child owns it and use it as many times as they want to use it until they make it part of their brain, of their knowledge, which is very different. Like you said, the teacher in the traditional classroom decides everything for the child. And then when they become adolescents, we punish them because they don't make good decisions. Other elements come in at the stage of adolescence, and the practice of independence, the practice of critical thinking, the practice of community living, of a code of honor. All those
Dang.
things help the adolescent make a good decision. But
Wow.
if I never practice and and then you send me to play in the NBA, I'm gonna fail. you know. So
Hmm.
you're very right. Independence, like math, you have to practice. Peaceful behavior, you have to practice. And when the first 6 years of your life is the time when you learn most of those things that are going to be the platform where you're going to build upon. And then comes adolescence, which is like it's like an earthquake. It's a beautiful earthquake. You
Yeah.
question so many things, and
Hmm.
it's a beautiful time to build yourself,
Hmm.
on top of a strong platform. But
Wow.
when you have a deteriorating school, and I go back to the question where you find a young man or a woman, 13-year-old, that doesn't know how to read and write well, that depends on everybody to do things, depends on the teacher to punish them to behave. That's a very, very difficult task for a human being. That's not dignified for a human being. So that's why we find so many young people saying, I give up, I leave this place. And in Puerto
Hmm.
Rico, we have an incredible, almost 40% of our young people do not reach the high school that there's have the right to reach.
Wow.
So I don't know if I went into
No,
is it
no,
my
no. The
flea?
tangents. I'm a huge fan of tangents. I love tangents. But a question that I wanted to ask then is because my background's in data science, so I am in some ways
Qué
always
chévere.
inclined to think about numbers. But and I'm curious to hear what you think. I haven't spent too much time thinking about this, but I think there is in some aspects from a societal perspective the need to help teachers in some ways if they are having poor pedagogical practices to teach better. But to do that, you have to be able to identify who's teaching well and who's not. In the model that you're saying, there seems to be so much that's left open to the child. Let's say a certain child is not, you know, I'm assuming in Montessori, there's still some standards somewhere to be met. And let's say a student isn't. How do you know whether that's just on the student or whether it's on the teacher, or do you even need to do some, like, how do you actually determine any of that if things are so open to interpretation that every student will be on their own journey of learning?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it's the opposite. Um, I think we have what we call a triangle of elements that are so close together. One of them is the teacher. The teacher is responsible to create the environment and to create the structure and order of the environment. Um, in a way, that the child can be independent. So I don't know if I am explaining myself. So I am the teacher of the classroom, and I am the most important person in the construction of that environment. It's me. I have to construct a classroom that makes sense to children, that invite them to order, that invite them to learning, that invite them to a code of honor with other children, that inspire them, that makes it interesting, so that I want to learn numbers and letters and figures and geometry and astronomy. So I
Mm,
do make that. I as a teacher have is so structured, so that it can be a place for independence to happen. For example, each teacher has a map of each child, and where that child is and where is moving, what are the interests, and that teacher is responsible for that child to develop to the utmost during those 3 years that they spend time with her or with him. We have multi-age classrooms, so we have 3 years with the same child, which is marvelous because I get to know the child well, and I observe. I have the curriculum, I have the child, and my observation of the child is crucial for me to help him or her, or to invite him or her to move through the curriculum. So it's very important. And when I go into a classroom, Gautam, and I see a classroom that children are not moving curriculum, that they're not doing things that are hard for them and they want to learn, that invite them to the next level, I have to deal with the teacher. There's something that's not going on well with the teacher. So I do have, a criteria to evaluate that teacher and to help her move to the right to the right direction, right? So the child develops their independence within a very structured environment that is there for them to discover. So it's an environment that doesn't have that order won't let the child do that. It will be disorganized. And the one of the most important things in the early childhood programs and in the elementary school is that the person organizes himself or herself. And the third piece so there's the teachers, there's the students, and there's the environment. And so I need to see how the environment is built, what is there, for the child to see, to study, to how the curriculum is presented. Is it presented in order? Is it logic? For example, a child that begins with the sticks, where they learn the length concept, and they put them in
mm-hmm.
order, and then they move on to the next material that makes sense to them because it's numbers, and then so the it's not a free. I mean, it's not. Well, what word did you use? To open, to free? No, it's very
Mm.
structured. But the child learns by himself or herself, and that's where the independence comes.
Yeah, I
But I
think
don't.
no, I've experienced another school that was similar to this. They didn't follow the Montessori method, but I think because I have been trained in such a, standards, like it's hard, I think, to even imagine something different until you see it in person and you're like,
Yeah.
wow, this actually works. I couldn't even, it's hard to imagine, right? Like I just feel like when you're schooled in a certain way where there's a lot of punishment, there's like a you need to do this at this time, there's no independence. When you think of a school that offers their students a little bit more independence, I think you'll find people who are just like, how doesn't it just break out into anarchy? Like, won't they just all like attack each other all the time? Because I think you mentioned something really important earlier. It's because when you give students who didn't practice independence a lot of independence randomly, that's when I think you'll see a lot of chaos. But people who have practiced independence and how to take on their own autonomy and their own kind of volition, I think if you see students like that who have done that for a long period of time, they don't just break into chaos when they're given a little bit more freedom. Because you're right,
No,
it is a
no.
practice.
Yeah, it is a practice. It is science. But then when you go into an environment, you're right. You can see some of the people that came from the school department to see me at the school would say, "This is chaos," and I said, "No, sit down and observe." The child has a purpose of what she or he's doing. There were children observing other children. They're learning from what they're doing. Children were working all the time, not interrupting each other. So they can be in different parts of the classroom doing their work, but they are in order, and there's a structure and there's a purpose. It's fascinating. I would love to take you to one of the schools to I love to sit down in a classroom and I always call a student and ask her or him to explain me what is going on here. You should see the answers that I get. I get um, philosophy of education 201.
Hmm.
And they explain, they bring me their agenda and they said, this is my agenda. I have to cover these things this week. And this is like in first to third grade, 6 to 9 years old. And how they explain their work. And for me, it's fascinating. It's the structure and order and purpose are elements for independence, which is very different from free for all. And the other thing that is very important is that how you establish a code of honor in the
Mm.
classroom, and then when respect is established from day one, you don't permit bullying, you don't allow anything that hurts another human being, you just don't do it. you know how the child learns that, and but if a child comes into a classroom where that is not clear, or where the teacher made, without wanting, bull a child, or talk disrespectfully about a children's work or a mother, or it it breaks. So that's why the teacher is so important, and her language, his gestures. It's fascinating to see how the teacher becomes part of the environment, and it's a
Mm.
model of values, of language, of relationships. And the best teachers don't talk much, they just
Mm.
provide the environment. Yeah, actually, I have this big struggle with this. We're working on Montessori is the first inclusive model. Montessori worked for all the children, so we love that for our school. So we had inclusion in our school. In our schools, we do. In many of our schools, we do. We have inclusion of children, no matter the way they learn. They're part of the community, and it's fascinating to see how they conquer their knowledge, their behaviors by being part of a community that has a code of honor that requires certain behavior of people. It's not the teacher telling me how to behave, it's that the community code of honor is telling me how to behave, and I
Mm.
practice every day being part of a healthy, respectful community. And sometimes the special education will bring all these aids for children. So I try to take them out as soon as possible. So the less adults we have in a classroom, the best. Usually 2 adults are more than enough.
Mm.
Uh, so the environment is child environment, or a young, the youth environment, and then you learn, you develop in that environment, that prepared environment for learning. So that's different from a traditional school where the discipline depends on the teacher, and the teacher talks all the time, gives you the knowledge, tells you what we're going to learn today. Today we're going to learn about. It's completely opposite. But it has order, purpose, structure, and it's based on the nature of development.
Mm. Yeah,
So
I
it
mean, I
works.
think, yeah, I mean, I would love to see, some of these. It's fascinating. I have a million
And
other questions to
and
ask. Is
let me just unite two things, and that's when I see Leo. Now remember the story of Leo, the parent, that the father that
mm,
told me, you go in there and do a school opposite to the one we had. I never knew that that was what we were going to do so profoundly. So I usually tell Leo, people ask me why Montessori, and I say, because you gave me a mandate. You
mm,
told me that I had to do
mm.
that. But
I
sorry, you
feel
had
like
you had another question.
no, I was just saying, I was like, we could talk. I have probably another 5,000 questions for you, but I don't want to take up too much more of your time. So I'll leave you with this last question. But I want to kind of get a little bit into what INE does, because that's the tool through which you're able to like work with so many different public schools. So if you could just give us a little bit of a background of what INE does, and the question I'm really interested in is what do you see to be the future vision of INE? What would you like
Okay.
education on the island to look like 50 years from now?
Mira, let me tell you very briefly, INE emerged from a very important question when we were working at the first public Montessori school. We began receiving other communities like Juan Domingo, asking for schools like the ones they were seeing emerge in Juan Domingo. So INE is a response to that question and to that quest of many communities around the island that are saying, I want a better school for my children. I want a better school for my students. I want a better school for myself as a teacher. So that's the INE spirit, is to accompany communities, school communities that want to transform their pedagogy, their culture, their way of life into a more human, a more human, efficient, responsive to the community needs school. So if we take the story again, is to change in a company's communities, changing a deteriorating school into a good school. That's our spirit, that's our goal, that's our mission, to be able to transform schools into excellent, public, accessible schools to children all over the island, where they're needed, where they are, where they requested. When I thought when I started got them that we were going to do a good school in one barrio, and I was so happy with that. But life started complicated things, and the family started growing, and we were 4 schools, and we were 12. Now we're 60 schools working together. Many of the stories very similar to the first story, of a resistance to a closure of a school or to the reopening of a public school and making it into a Montessori public school accessible to children. So that's what we do. We accompany communities to protect the right of good public education that all our children are having. What do I envision? When we started, we never thought we were going to be in the midst of a controversial conversation with the school department. The school department is moving towards a more private privatization of schools and more charter-oriented schools, less schools, larger schools. We're moving into community schools, community governance schools, community-based, and small schools in different parts of Puerto Rico, especially the rural area, the coast of Puerto Rico, where it's lacking a lot of schooling. So when I think of Puerto Rico, I wish that movements like ours will be able to establish a strong platform and to protect the public education system of Puerto Rico, and to protect it to be good schools. Each one of them can be a good school, like we were able to make a good school. So I dream of a school that is centered around a round table of teachers, parents, students making decisions for their children, education, and making good, serious decisions using science in favor of the community. What we know about the human being and the brain and the learning and the nature of learning at the service of our people, so that we can rescue what we used to have. We used to have a very strong public education system. All of us came from that. All our parents, our grandparents, we all came to the university from different social backgrounds through a very good public school. So I dream of that, of conquering that again. And I am very hopeful. What I see every day, the community is becoming more and more engaged. Our alumni are citizens that are very awake and are participating of these processes of protecting a good school for their children that are now our grandchildren and for their country. They have a sense of a common good that they learned when they were 6 years old in a classroom, in a Montessori classroom, where the code of honor was established.
Hmm.
I don't know if I answered your question.
You did. No, you did. This was a really beautiful conversation. I feel like I was able to you pieced together the story very well. And I know there's so many things that we weren't able to cover, but I think understanding from the conception of, what your education was like, what you learned at Harvard, the things that you then like understood about community schools, going back and being a principal and working with the community, the issues that you identified and the things that you did to change that. And then eventually grow, and then it grew larger and larger and larger. Now you're working with, I think, almost a little less than 100 public schools, right? Yeah, I mean it's
Mhm.
fascinating to see how a story like that grows over time. And yeah, I mean a lot of these schools, I think sometimes the thing is my imagination is capped, and so to see the a different teaching style altogether would be so enlightening to see. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing
Mhm.
and giving us all your wisdom.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And you're always welcome. I would love to take you around to see schools and talk to children about their work, what they're doing, what they're constructing. They're constructing very special human beings that I
Mm,
know are going to drive our country to a better place.
nice. And that brings us to the end of our conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you again for listening and making this process so much more enjoyable. If you haven't had the chance to already, make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts to get the latest updates on new episodes. If you've been learning useful information here, feel free to leave a review as well. A little bit goes a long way in spreading this podcast. And have a wonderful day. And as per usual, stay re-educated.